In the 1 year before their planned dive at Zacaton Cenote in Mexico, Sheck Exley and Jim Bowden underwent a series of very rigorous training. This is to acclimatize themselves for the extreme environment that they would encounter on their descent in the 1,080 feet deep water-filled sinkhole, a depth that has never been reached during a single dive before. The two were positive and optimistic about this endeavor. They were confident that they could finish the dive. After all, being prepared is already half the victory. Unfortunately, in technical cave diving, preparedness is never enough. The harsh conditions in the deeper water were too harsh and unforgiving that even the smallest of errors could pose the greatest risk. Bowden and Exley would learn this the hard way when the tiniest miscalculation during their dive resulted in a devastating tragedy. Zacaton is the deepest cenote located in El Rancho Azufrosa in northeastern Mexico. It was discovered by Jim Bowden's team on May 2, 1990 at the end of their 2 weeks of exploration and surveying in the Nacimiento Santa Clara, a massive cave system at the base of El Abra near the Nacimiento Monte. The discovery was made when they pursued a current near a limestone outcropping. The current led them to a small cave which they followed further until they reached an opening with a natural light source, indicating that they had made a connection to the surface. The exuberant divers emerged into Zacaton, which was named after the islands of zacate grass floating on the cenote's surface. Several hundreds of dives in the next 3 years would slowly reveal Zacaton's enormous dimensions. But it was not until April 1993, when Sheck Exley, the most famous cave diver at the time, joined Bowden's team, that they discovered just how deep the sinkhole really is. Bowden and Exley air dived and reached 250 and 407 feet each respectively. These were far beyond the previously plumbed depth of 250 feet, so the team went back to try a more accurate plumb line. They watched as the line spun off the reel and were greatly astonished when the weight only stopped after some 1,080 feet had been measured. The next day, using mixed gases, Bowden dove 504 feet while Exley dove 721. Neither experienced performance difficulties nor physiological complications during and after the dive. These made the two ambitious. They could actually attempt to set a new world record if they managed to descend even deeper. Bowden and Exley came to an agreement. They would return together to Zacaton within the calendar year to obtain the bottom of the cenote. The next 12 months saw the two completing multiple dives that progressively got deeper in preparation for the 1,000 feet attempt. Bowden and his team made 6 trips to Mexico to challenge the sinkholes in the area. Meanwhile, Exley went to explore the huge underwater cave at Bushman's Hole, South Africa, where he experienced visual, somatic, and neurological symptoms of high-pressure nervous syndrome, or HPNS, at 863 feet deep in the system. Fortunately, the symptoms were quickly resolved on his first decompression stop at 400 feet. There were no lasting effects, but this incident accurately showed just how dangerous a deeper dive would be. At last, their preparations ended, and in April 1994, Exley and Mary Ellen Eckhoff met with Bowden's team at the Rancho Azufrosa. Their diving site was, of course, the Zacaton, which apparently had the perfect environment for an open-circuit dive to 1,000 feet and beyond. The cenote was easily accessible, and its water was warm with no perceptible current. The first 2 days were spent staging the required decompression bottles at their specified depths in Zacaton and El Nacimiento. The bottles were installed in 2 different line sets at a few meters apart so that Exley and Bowden could dive independently without any contact and potential interference. Their initial descent into the sinkhole would be very rapid, a quick in and a slow out, so that they could lessen the buildup of gases in their bodies and avoid potential bends, which is an excruciatingly painful, often fatal condition. The team finally assembled on the banks of El Nacimiento on the morning of April 6, 1994, ready for their much-anticipated dive. Bowden and Exley geared up and swam through the 600-foot passage called El Pasaje and into Zacaton, while the support team remained behind to monitor the divers' conditions and provide assistance when and where it was needed. At approximately 9:50 a.m. Central Standard Time, The two reached their independent lines. They nodded affirmations to each other before beginning their descent. That was the last time they saw each other. Bowden planned a descent rate of 100 feet per minute to 300 feet on air, then the same rate to 600 feet on heli-air before switching to his bottom mix. He would then slow down at 750 to 800 feet, where he noticed the emergence of HPNS symptoms on his previous dives. All went according to plan, and he was able to pass 800 feet with barely a tremor. However, upon reaching 900 feet, Bowden was shocked to discover that he had breathed more air than he was planning. His bottom mix cylinders contained barely more than 1,000 psi. If the pressure dropped to less than 500 psi, his regulator could fail, which would be very dangerous for him. Bowden decided to ascend. He inflated his buoyancy control device and managed to stop at 925 feet. He switched tanks and slowly made his way up to 450 feet. During this ascent, he used up both his bottom and travel mix. He reached his first deco stop, but he wasn't safe. The regulator on his deco bottle free-flowed violently the moment he switched it on. He had 8 minutes before his next stop, and he was quickly losing precious air. Several meters away, Exley was also in similar danger, but unlike Bowden, he had realized too late that he was quickly using up his gas. He didn't have enough air to inflate his buoyancy device, so he wrapped himself up in his line to quickly stop his descent. His maximum depth was only 906, so he stopped at a higher point than Bowden. However, without the help of buoyancy, it would be nearly impossible for him to ascend. He was quickly losing time. Hundreds of feet above them, support divers Ann Kristovich and Bowden's wife, Karen Hull, were waiting anxiously. They watched the bubble path of the two men since their initial descent. Bowden's bubbles disappeared first, followed by Exley's a few seconds later, indicating that the two had passed the ledge at 250 feet. A quarter of an hour later, one set of bubbles reappeared. They knew that one of the divers had started his ascent, but they couldn't guess who. The two women exchanged uneasy glances before Kristovich followed their original plan and dived to meet Bowden at the 47 minutes mark of the dive. At the same time, Mary Ellen Eckhoff joined Hull at the surface and was appraised of the scenario. Concerned but not panicked, she grabbed an extra deco bottle and dived to meet Exley. Bowden managed to find a solution for his deco bottle. He couldn't fix the regulator, but he found that he could open and close the valve after each breath. It was tiring work, and he had to cut his decompression short due to the lost air in the beginning. He had a much easier time on his second deco stop, where he had to stay for a longer decompression. On his third stop at 130 feet, he could finally relax. He looked around and found that the stage bottles on Exley's lines were still neatly packaged and unused. He had a sinking feeling, but he was also confident that Exley had gone deeper than him and was probably still at the lower deco stop. This confidence was not unfounded. Bowden had been a diving buddy with Exley on many occasions, and on all of them, Exley was always able to dive deeper than him. This same confidence was also felt by Eckhoff, and it kept her worries at bay. Exley was an expert and the most renowned cave diver at the time. He was the Michael Jordan of cave diving, so there's just no way that he wouldn't surface. However, on her way down, she only encountered Kristovich and Bowden, who had just met up. She hastily scrawled on her slate that she was going down to 250 to look for bubbles. She dropped over the deep ledge, but there were still no signs of Exley. She could only find the 2 laminated pages of his dive profile, which is something he would never let go of alive. She realized then that her worst fears had come true. Exley was gone. Through her tears, Eckhoff somehow managed to swim up. She wanted to go to the surface, but Hull intercepted her at 100 feet. Eckhoff's gauge read 278 feet, so Hull could only hold and comfort her while waiting more than 30 minutes to decompress. Above the sinkhole, there were press representatives waiting to write about the record-breaking dive. They never thought that what they would write instead was about the death of a legend. On his last deco stop, Bowden finally learned from Hull what had happened. His mind went blank, and he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that Exley was gone. It seemed so impossible when he thought about all the achievements of the man. Exley had made over 4,000 dives. and he had conquered over 1,000 caves, but now he is gone. Bowden spent the next few hours of his decompression with this terrible knowledge. Finally, he emerged in the night, but he was suffering from his second case of bends. Kristovich treated him using a controversial French technique that proved effective with the first case. He was injected with massive doses of intravenous steroids, anticoagulants, and painkillers. Bowden was back on his feet by the next morning. Many thought that Exley's body would not be recovered, but 3 days later, when the dive team pulled up Exley's unused decompression tanks, they discovered his body entangled in the guideline. His exact cause of death would be unknown, and the autopsy would be inconclusive. The best educated guess would point to an HPNS incident which Exley had experienced on his dive in Africa. In the following years, there would be little talk about Exley's death, but his life and achievements would always be celebrated. Besides, Bowden still has the deepest open cave dive in Zacaton to his name at 925 feet. If you have followed this story to this point, I would like to say a big thank you. If you like this kind of story, don't forget to hit the like button and leave a comment below. For more of this type of content, please click on the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so you will be notified when another video is posted. Until next time, be cautious and don't ever lose your sense of wonder.